Hi, and welcome to the People of Aquaponics, where we get to know the thought leaders of the aquaponic industry. My name is John. I'm the CEO here at Aquaponics AI, and today we're fortunate to have Joe Pate. Every time I talk to this guy, he's got like 200 more research papers that he's categorized and dissected and put in his library, and it's impressive. And he's worked on commercial farms in the research field, and he's an advisor for the Aquaponics Association, and he just recently started up his own company called Regen Aquaculture. And he just did a recent presentation on oxygen reduction potential, and everyone's been loving it. So we love Joe. And yeah, Joe, welcome and thanks for joining today.
Thanks, John, for having me. I'm happy to be here.
So Regen Aquaculture, tell us a little bit about that. What are you doing? What's going on at Regen?
Yeah, so at Regen Aquaculture, the sole focus, or one of the main focuses of the group, is working with farmers to help them learn how to run their systems better. You know, I spent a lot of time designing and helping build systems, and I kind of found that while I'm really good at the engineering and side of things, just because I have a knack for it, it didn't really, satisfy me, which, more of my interest is working with people and helping them learn things and testing out new things and stuff like that. So what we focus on is working with farmers to improve their operations. And then I also work with other third-party consultants to tackle things like finances and marketing and human resources, side of the farm, and kind of, do what we can to make them successful.
Who are you trying to kind of tailor your services towards? Is it more the small commercial, large, maybe a home grower?
Yeah, I think, I don't like to box myself into anything, but predominantly I think the biggest area for growth that I would hope to see in the future is going to be with small home producers or small producers. So maybe, less than 10,000 square feet here in the US or something along those lines, give or take some, depending on the area and what's right for it. But I personally want to see a lot more of those small farms grow, because I think, if you talk about food sovereignty and having, access to food equally around places, then we need more, decentralized food systems around, the world, including here in the US.
Yeah, completely. I love that. I think it's necessary to see the kind of urban ag and peri-urban type stuff really pick up. How do you see kind of Regen Aquaculture kind of pushing the envelope there, and where do you guys operate out of?
So we operate out of Kentucky right now, but we're pretty mobile. This month alone, I've got 2 installs, and then going down to check out a third farm that's getting built, and there are more farmers on starting up with their operations, and so learning on that side. But in terms of where we fit in, the methods that I kind of look at aren't necessarily the run of the mill. I am a big proponent of trying to utilize resources that we have locally and finding ways to make them beneficial in the system, whether that's, taking one waste product and processing that in a way that we can add it back into the system, or maybe we're taking that waste product and we're looking for potential revenue streams out of it, to other ag industries, maybe not just including aquaponics. So along those lines, we apply a lot of foliar sprays and things like that, and focus on really growing healthier plants, so that way, we can grow healthier food for people. And, there's a lot that goes into that.
Yeah, for sure. So say there's a farmer, I don't know, out of state, and they're looking to start up their small farm. What's kind of Regen's methodology for kind of going in there, and how would you differentiate yourself from, say, someone else in the area? What's kind of the passion behind Regen that would make it valuable to a small farmer in a different location?
Yeah, well, part of the passion is, working with farmers and wanting them to be successful. I want aquaponics to succeed, and even outside of aquaponics, I have a lot of experience in soil work. My mom's a horticulturist, so I grew up working with plants and soil, and I want to see agriculture as a whole grow, and regenerative ag, as well as regenerative aquaculture, where we're starting to look at, how do we grow our own food sources and how do we, bring that onto the farm. Where we start out with farmers is it tends to be a simple questionnaire, get an idea of what kind of their biggest issues are, what they feel their issues are, what's holding them back from, achieving what they want to achieve, and those kind of things. Sometimes specific questions, sometimes more broad questions, and just get an idea of the person. And then, from there, the best way to, if it's an operating farm, to kind of start out is that we go in there and we kind of do like a full farm audit, or, an audit of different sections of the farm, and kind of review how operations are going, see what it's like on the day-to-day. If they're doing, they're going through the checklist and kind of doing the things that, it might take to be successful as a farmer, taking data points and, having some type of logs, behind all the food safety and traceability side of things, and making sure the fish are actually fed when they were supposed to be, and, the pH is getting based up the way it should, because it's easy to kind of let these things slip, yeah.
You mentioned using a lot of the kind of local agricultural byproducts. What's kind of the most surprising or the most useful byproduct that you've encountered that is applicable to aquaponics?
The most surprising and really fun that I would say, and I don't know, I wouldn't say this is maybe necessarily applicable to aquaponics, but it has to do with aquaponics, and that is taking the dead fish, especially if you lose fish and it's pretty close to them dying and they're still fresh and things like that. I'll take and I'll ferment a lot of those fish, and and I've taught farmers how to do that. And when you ferment it, you can do a lot of different methods. Some you can turn into a fish hydrolysate or something like that. I do a little bit more aerobic fermentation to just focus more on getting amino acids out of it, and just a little bit different microbial profile when you break it down. And so I think that's super valuable. I mean, when you dilute it down, 20 fish might make you a couple gallons, and a gallon of the fertilizer can be diluted in a 1 to 1,000 ratio. So, 1 gallon of that turns into 1,000 gallons of fertilizer for your fields outside. And it's, a very nitrogen rich bioavailable form, because it's not in, it's in an amino acid form, which plants can take up directly, and microbes and things like that. And so that's a very powerful one that has quite a bit of economic potential in it, I think. I've got one farm, I think they've got about 35 or 45 gallons. They had a big fish die off and fermented, a few hundred fish, or, I don't know exact many, but it came
and they
out.
fed the nation with it.
Yeah, now they've got this, and now they have a small 2-acre plots next to their greenhouse, and now they're applying it on that. So, and testing now with some other farmers in the local area. So that's a pretty powerful one. I think there are some other ones that, are going to be really important in the future that I am not necessarily an expert in yet. And that's like looking at biomass waste, the leftover leafy greens or stuff that comes out that's inedible, the roots, things like that. How do we take that, maybe process it anaerobically and then aerobically, or, there's a million different ways to process these things, and then getting those nutrients back out of them, so that way we can resupply them to the aquaponic system and, reduce our footprint overall, the amount going in. And so, I think that's a pretty good thing.
I love it. So you have been known for kind of your research, and you're active on the forums and everything. But I think really I'd love to hear more about Joe Pate. kind of who you are. How did you get to become such a aquaponic aquaculture enthusiast?
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of started out when I was in high school. I got interested in growing algae fuel for fertilizer. And also I was looking at it, growing it for like biofuels and pharmaceuticals. I had all these ideas. And at the time, I learned that people actually got paid to remove some of the algae blooms from the river that are, is caused by excess fertilizers and runoff and eutrophication that occurs in our riverways. And I developed this plan. I was like, oh, I'm going to harvest it from the ocean or from the riverways. Then I'm going to grow fish to grow more. And at the time, I didn't really know anything about aquaculture or aquaponics. I don't think I'd ever heard either word. My dad used to be a fisherman, and my mom worked with plants, so it's almost kind of natural. But I learned about it a little bit in college, got interested. My college paid for me to go take a workshop with Charlie Schultz, who, is a pretty well-known name in the industry. And when I saw what Kentucky State University was where that workshop was, and when I saw kind of what equipment they had available and the funding for research, I jumped ship. I changed colleges, and I started working right away for the aquaculture division. It wasn't really something that said aha to me that I want to do this. It was more just like, this is it, this is what I love. One, working with animals and fish were something that I hadn't had experience with besides, fishing in a lake or a river or something like that. But I I fell in love with raising them. I mean, know by working on the farm, seeing them move around, you just, it's so great. And then growing plants. And at the time I was doing research studies, which I'm a big nerd. I love reading and, just kind of thinking about things, pushing kind of the boundaries sometimes and having fun with ideas. But I started doing research, and at the time we set up a small greenhouse that I think was about 23 by 40. And so I built my first system there, and then rebuilt it another 2 times. After learning how to do it better and having solids built up and all of the troubles you go through it when you're starting out, especially if you don't have training or whatnot. And then I went and took a course in an engineering workshop by Dr. James Ebling and Dr. Michael Timmons at Cornell University. And I realized, I was like, oh, this is all the reasons why my system doesn't work. And so, rebuilt it. And the whole time was growing food for the local food shelter, the men's shelter, and then some other ones that we would donate excess food to. And so, when you're doing those kind of things, it just like fills to the heart. You're happy about what you're doing, you're excited about it. And it kind of like paved the path for me to continue going forward, and at a certain point, I knew how to run the systems, I knew the science, and then it only kind of made sense for me to start trying to spread that information and help others learn it, better than I did, or also.
And you said you rebuilt your system several times. I'm curious, after all those iterations and all the systems that you've built now, do you kind of have like an ideal system? I mean, you've dealt with brackish water, you probably dealt with shrimp there in Kentucky State, decoupled, integrated with larger permaculture practices. Like what's your kind of ideal aquaponics setup now?
The better you are at aquaponics, or the more experience you have with it, the more flexibility you have with what you can do, so there might be some things that I would say that I might try out that I wouldn't recommend to somebody, beginning, or something like that. But I think when it comes down to it, in terms of a go-to design, I would say no, maybe on some things, but it's really situational to the area. What are you trying to grow? What's your purpose? If you're a small farm and you're, doing a CSA model, well, now you need some variety in there. And if you're in a humid area, or, an area that gets quite a bit of rainfall or something like that, then, a lot of times you can also grow outside in soil, so maybe you're doing a greenhouse inside that's focusing on leafy greens and herbs, and you're, growing your fruits outdoors. Now, say if you're in an arid region and you wanted that CSA type model, the nutrient or the water dynamics don't quite work out right, trying to grow into that arid environment. So then it makes sense. Well, now I might do some media beds or some wicking beds along with my DWC inside, and you can, and, you design it based on kind of the needs of what the market is, really, is what I tend to recommend. You want to grow what you can sell. It's not a matter of what you can grow, it's a matter of what you can sell. And so, I'm pretty flexible for myself. If I had a farm, I would do mostly probably DWC, if my market depended on it. And then maybe some other stuff, microgreens, maybe some media beds, maybe some wicking on a small portion. But, lettuce goes bad quick, basil goes bad quick, these things that, they don't have a lot long of a shelf life, and our bodies are starving for them. Once you see people get some of that fresh food, you don't realize you've been missing it. You don't realize what good lettuce tastes like. And there's a farm I work with in Canada who he just sent me a picture, one of his clients, where he has like a giant, she has a giant romaine head of lettuce, and then the romaine she got from the store, and it's a third of the size, no color, no flavor in it. And it becomes a kind of a no-brainer once you start tasting it, and your body's like, whoa, this is what salads to taste like, lettuce. I don't, eat a lot of like vinaigrettes or dressings or nothing like that on my salad, just because it has that natural flavor, which, yeah. So I'd probably focus on growing that stuff. And then also, I'm a big proponent that if you are in a wetter region and you have the ability to, utilize your land outside, I think we, as part as farmers, is we're stewards of the earth, right? And, we have to take care of our area, of our space. And, if you have a 2-acre, say, plot of land and you're only taking care of the 3,000 square foot greenhouse, well, you're not really doing justice to the earth, or what you could be doing to the environment. Even if you're not growing, maybe you're doing wildflowers for, butterfly repopulation or pollinator, food or something like that. But you could take that water and use it outside on your fields from the aquaponics system if you sized it right and all of those things. And so I'm big at looking towards, how do we combine more aquaculture with large scale ag and more soil based agriculture and regenerative farming practices? Because I think there is a lot of disconnect there in both industries, which, happens a lot in lots of industries. But, I think there's a lot of room where we start collaborating, and, we're going to see so much growth over the next few years. It's going to be wild and really good for the earth. So I'm excited for it.
So let me ask you, just for some of our viewers, really lay it out for them. Like, what's the benefit of having your ideal system that you just mentioned? So you have, your greenhouse sitting on a 3-acre plot of land or something like that, for example, and you're doing, maybe you're doing some sort of flowers outside for butterflies, or you're doing some sort of soil farming in addition to your aquaponic system, where you're growing greens or whatever. What would be the benefit to the kind of broader ecosystem there of having an aquaponic system or doing aquaponics, like in terms of economics, job creation, market shifts, kind of distributor, how it changes the distributor mindset? What are the effects of actually doing this kind of next gen farming?
Yeah, well, on the fish side of things, if you're looking at, what kind of protein sources do we have going forward that are sustainably grown and are, not going to take a lot of resources that might be needed elsewhere. And fish, checks a lot of those boxes. Fish, has a low feed conversion ratio, so less than 2 to 1, so 2 pounds of feed in per pound of fish gain. And that drops even more. I've seen it drop to 1 to 1, on a really good system. Mostly research. Sometimes, real life farms aren't so meticulous about everything, and so they don't get quite as good numbers. But really good numbers. The protein quality is really good. Our bodies, love it in terms of what we need for amino acid profiles and things like that. Like most animals, fish can be, their diet can be changed. So that way they're naturally kind of supplemented with extra omega-3s and 6s and, things like that, that we might need, healthy essential fatty acids. So there's a lot of benefits there. There are also, somewhat a little bit easier, somewhat a little bit harder. A terrestrial animal, they have, the natural earth to kind of to take care of them. When an aquatic organism, you've got to do a lot of the work, but they don't run away on you. They, you don't get a cow loose and the field. You got to go chase it down. They all stay right there pretty nicely, and and harvesting is easy. Stick a net in, pull out 50 of them, 20 of them. So that's nice on that side of things. And then another benefit is that aquaponic water is full of microbial life, a lot of nitrifying bacteria, but also tons of organisms. And the more established your aquaponic system becomes, it starts to develop these keystone microbial species that, we see in nature. And sometimes that can take up to 15 years if you're looking at some things, in an aquaponic system. When you're getting this microbial life build up and you're spraying that now on the soil, when you start looking at it, and I don't know the exact number here. I think I've read, I don't know if this is accurate or if it changes, based on who you're asking, but I've read that about 70% of all of the microbes that we see, in the aquatic and soil field, in soil and in water are pretty much the same, maybe cousins of each other, slight variations. But they're pretty much the same microbes. And, when you start realizing that, then you're like, okay, I'm taking this nitrifying bacteria and I'm applying it to a field. And then you start realizing, okay, now I'm actually getting some synergistic effect, between that bacteria and nitrifying, supplying nitrogen to the soil, which kind of helps rebuild it. And, if you're doing regenerative practices, now you're really building a healthy microbiome for the soil. And that, starts bringing back life, fungi and things like that start breaking down pollution in the soils. And so now you're remediating the soils. And in addition to that, you're creating food for, the insects. You're cleaning the air. You're increasing water filtration rate of the soils, when it rains there. And, you're helping with droughts and helping replenish aquifers depending on where you're at, And so you start getting all these like kind of compounding effects on it, which, they just start falling into place. You don't really expect it a lot of times, and we might not know all of it, but they just start dominoing. And then on the reverse side is now you have this field that maybe, I was talking with a farmer in Australia just last night, actually, or maybe 2 days ago, who does some regenerative ag and soil and is starting up an aquaponics system. And then you start looking at, well, what can I grow here? Well, I can grow legumes maybe, or maybe I can grow something that grain, some type of food source out in the soil that now you can implement it into your aquaponics system. And now you can kind of create this circular, food web on your farm. And, I as part of, if we want a regenerative, regen aquaculture, the regen stands for regenerative. And the parent company is Regenerative Ecosystems to that. But, I think if we want to go towards this regenerative mindset, we have to learn how do we grow our own food. And, that's something I'd like to tackle more in the future. I know you're pretty interested in it. And I saw Paul's talk the other day that you all had, and it was wonderful. I thought it was really great. And then actually there was another individual, I think, with Red Sea Aquaponics or something along those lines.
Ryan Lafers, yeah.
Yeah. And, I know that there's a lot of work that it sounded like they were doing with, sustainable feeds and things like that. And, when you start I think that's very important when you look at the overall, end game, which is how do we get food sovereignty? How do we not depend on all these outside influences to make sure that we can grow food where we're at, and, you have to grow your own food for your fish when it comes down to it. And so we got to start looking into ways to do that.
What's been your primary focus when researching, like, and how did you decide that it was important?
I don't necessarily have a primary focus on researching, and maybe that's good, maybe that's bad. The way I think the best way to learn things is to make connections a lot of times. And so when I'm reading stuff, maybe it's just like I'm interested in it. Maybe I see something and I'm like, oh, I want to learn more about that. But I think, by expanding what you're learning about rather than focusing on one thing, then you start being able to make connections more. So if I'm really interested in food safety and the microbiology of things. But if I just kind of focused on that, then I wouldn't maybe understand the plant health side of things, right? And how these microbes that, if I'm going at it from a food safety point of view, maybe I just care about what's safe or not safe for humans. But unless I look at it in this broader scope, then I don't really think about how are these microbes affecting the plants and how are the plants affecting the microbes. One thing we've learned now is that plants are actually farming microbes. They're not vegetarians. They're eating those bacterias and things like that. And so I try not to stick into any one category. And really it's just whatever I find interesting at the moment, or things I find that are going to be important. In terms of the biggest things in the future, I think one, genetics is always really important. I think that we need to start looking at potentially starting more breeding programs for small farmers. And I know that gets a little difficult and isn't always an option, but I think that a lot of our plants genetically have been, and there's some research to back this up, it's still developing stuff, but have kind of lost some of their power because they've been genetically grown to, say, become very well affected by mineral nutrition versus biological nutrition. And so sometimes when you look at, say, a newer variety versus maybe a heritage variety of crop, the heritage variety will have a significantly better reaction to microbial inoculation than one of the newer grown crops, because it's kind of lost that ability to communicate. And that's partly due to breeding practices and stuff like that we didn't really know. So I think genetics on both the plant side and then fish side, is a multi-billion-dollar industry. So I think those are both going to be really important. And I'm again about trying to figure it out on the farm. That isn't always the case, and so we got to work with what we can. Outside of that, nutrient dynamics I think are really important for me, because a lot of the food that we grow in aquaponics, it grows really well. It looks really great, and nutritionally, it's a really solid product. But I think we can make it better. When we look at things like I'm forgetting the word right now, but basically biofortification of that food. So how do we, biofortify that food, make it stronger, include things that might normally not be included, like iodine, selenium, silica. How do we get these things into the plant that aren't normally talked about? It may not be needed for the plant, but are important for the animal that eats it, us, or, livestock or things like that. And so, I think that's a big important, combining soil and aquaculture. There's some really great work being done right now. I have a friend who's doing a lot of research in this for waste treatment and improving waste utilization of aquaponic systems. So how do we, get all of the nutrients out of it and do that efficiently in a low cost manner, and then maybe get some byproducts out of it, like methane and other things like that, depending on how we're processing these goods. So I think there's a lot of places for us to grow, but I think a lot of those things I just mentioned, the research is already being done in other fields. And so if we start, working with those other researchers in those other fields, now we can start having those discussions. How does it relate? And, then we don't necessarily have to wait for it to be done in aquaponics, because, the plant functions pretty similar, whether it's, in soil or in water. And so, there are some things that we can learn that will just be true, and some things will change, but, you kind of get a feel for that as you go on.
What would you say the biggest gaps are in research then? I mean, if you're talking about all these different kind of, what I appreciate about what you're saying is that you're taking a multidisciplinary approach to understanding kind of a farm and the microbial life and the plant life and the fish life. And I think that's super necessary. And I think that gives you a unique stance to say this particular area needs more research. And so my question is more along the lines of, where do you see there are gaps in research and there should be funding going towards this?
Yeah. Well, I think there are gaps in research on the food safety side of things. I'm a big proponent of adding probiotics into the system. I did some research in this when I was in college, and unfortunately, we presented on it. It was some, pretty good information that we got, but it was incomplete, so to say. The picture was yet to be painted. We just got the palette ready. The brush strokes have to be drawn still. So, some of our limitations there were having an enclosed environment that we could, actually inoculate, the systems with a foodborne pathogen to see how, the probiotics would react with it. And so, there's limitations there in terms of funding. Other limitations, I think the biggest limitation, and it isn't necessarily what's not being researched, but it's the lack of communication between researchers. I have friends who are researching stuff, here in Kentucky or Alabama, or maybe they're out west in Washington, or they're, in Brazil, or Australia, all these different countries, right? And a lot of times when I talk to them, they're working on similar stuff. And I'm like, oh, you should talk to this person, and try to connect them with other researchers doing the same stuff. Because I found that, when I was doing research, I would do a project and then learn someone else that I met at a conference, in Germany or France, that were doing the same exact project, or very similar one. And so I think we could not step on, each other's toes and, do a little more thorough job and just like spread in our reach if we tackled more things and had more communication between the researchers. Now, that said, I do realize there's some benefit in various people running the same research study to see if you get, replicate results, or the same, results come out. And so, there's some benefits on redoing studies and things like that. But that's one of my biggest things that I've talked about for years is there's not enough communication between researchers in general, and then also between researchers and farmers. What happens in the research industry doesn't always get correlated over to the actual industry, which is one of the biggest frustrations I had when I was doing research. Was, we did all these cool things, we learned this awesome information, but we weren't, seeing it implemented, and weren't doing enough in my book, in my opinion, to get that information out to the farmer. Not that we didn't try, it's hard to do, and so I think communication between all of those aspects is probably the biggest limitation in the industry right now, or one of them at least.
Yeah, that's actually one of our biggest values, is that people would have access to information. I mean, we're not trying to promote a particular method. I think we want people to choose a method that works for them and really run with it, but have access to that information. So speaking of information, how about someone who's just starting off with a small farm? What would be your, initial advice to them getting started?
Well, first, take a workshop. I often recommend that. And before you even do that, maybe do some reading. I know you and Daniel have done a lot of work at taking the FAO manual and some other, aquaponics manual type work and simplifying them and making them as like a quick go through, click through kind of thing, which I've looked through how you all did that. And I thought it was very clear, very great stuff. I think that is a very good starting point. I think it's probably the best we have. I will say that there are several things in the design part of the FAO manual that I don't agree with, from a design standpoint, in terms of, nutrient dynamics and sizing the system and things like that. But I think it has enough good information that it gives you, it's the most combined amount of information that kind of gives you a broad scope of it that I think we have available right now. And it's free. You don't have to go pay for a book. It was written by a lot of, really smart people. And so a lot of great stuff in there. And then taking a workshop with someone who it depends on, where you are. I tend to recommend taking a workshop from someone who's been around, experienced, done things for a while, made a lot of mistakes, because it's the best way to learn. I will say that sometimes, I realize it's not always feasible. And a lot of times, if they can't, if somewhere in another country that can't travel, maybe has limited funds, I try to, if they can't find one, I try to look and say, do I know anybody in that area who I think is an expert in that area? Maybe they're an expert with the local materials. Maybe they're, they really know what's available and whatnot. Maybe they don't know all the science the same way as, other people might. And the designs are a little more low tech. They still grow food, right? And it satisfies the need. And, I don't think we all need to be super high tech systems. I think, to be honest, on a lot of scales, I look more towards semi-intensive systems rather than super intensive, because I think they, a lot of places where we need food are a lot of these developing countries. And when you talk about resources there, it doesn't always make sense to say, build this giant facility and put all this money in when you could do a fraction of that. And you might see more loss in crops, but you could, grow 15 times as much area. And, even if you have 20% loss in crops, it doesn't matter. You have plenty of food, and so getting familiar with someone in your area is really important, I think, that knows your local environment. And if not, then, go for someone who's an expert. I think there's several out there, which I can recommend if you want, I think that's a great place, and also gives you an opportunity to meet and ask somebody questions. And then when you're starting out and actually working, I'm a very big proponent of making connections in this industry. It's small enough that, I think that we should all be reaching out to each other. Joining the Aquaponics Association is a great thing you can do, because then, there's a lot of forums on there and a lot of help that you can reach out to other members. And also some of the members are people like myself, have been in the industry for a while, and so we see that, and, we can jump in and throw some knowledge behind it, and so things like that are good. Communicating with other growers, especially if you have any in your area, even maybe trying to get a few started in your area after you're going, we got to build a community to support each other, and
so you're basically saying that you're recruiting people to Kentucky, or what?
I love Kentucky. I think it's tied for my top prettiest states I've been to. But the thing about Kentucky is right now we only have one fish processor in the state. And so depending on the scale of things, it makes it difficult for growth on the aquaculture side. Not that it can't be there, and small scale can be there, if you're growing for specific markets that say will take a whole fish, without it being processed, which, here in the US is typically going to be Hispanic and Asian markets that, prefer that. But maybe not here in Kentucky, but anywhere, myself, I am probably going to be moving more towards an arid region. And the reason for that is, I have this mindset that I want to help rebuild something, and so what's a better place to start than somewhere where the ground is dry and barren, or less inhabited, and so that way you can start building that life again, and
You're welcome to come out to the Middle East anytime you want. So,
I'm getting my passport right now. So as soon as things are become less restricted, maybe I'll come visit. It'll be fun.
Sounds good. Thanks, Joe. Hey, where can people find out more about what you're doing and follow you?
Yeah. So right now we're finishing the website for the company. Mostly we've been working word of mouth, but the website will be done early March, and that's just going to be regenaquaculture.com. So keep up in tune for that. I'm pretty active on Facebook, so you can search me on there, Joe Pate, or on LinkedIn, also Instagram. I try to keep active on those areas. Aquaponics Association forums, I'm a member on there. You can reach out. So pretty direct access to me right now, if you're interested.